All right, everyone. Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel. I'm joined, as usual, by Daniel Starkin, and a tough one for the Dodgers tonight. They lose 7-2 on a night that it kind of feels like everything that could possibly go wrong did. This was one of those games that I think a lot of people had circled. The Padres, they're contending. They're only 2.5 games back coming into the night. You've got Kershaw, the Dodgers' best pitcher, against the Padres' best pitcher, Lamet. And it just felt like a big deal. It was in San Diego. No fans, obviously, but it just felt like a big deal. And as I said, it kind of felt like everything that could go wrong did. And we'll get to all of it. We'll talk about, should Dodger fans be worried? Did Dave Roberts make a mistake pulling Kershaw? Is the bullpen a mess? What do we do about Jock Peterson and Max Muncy? There is a ton to talk about. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube or via Periscope on Twitter, hit us up. Let us know what your reactions are. Where are you at on a scale of 1 to 10? Are you worried? Are you 10? Is this season over with and the whole thing's a mess? Is this 1 and the season doesn't matter? Let us know what you think. But Daniel, just looking at this game, there's so many storylines we could get to. For you, I've got one thing that sticks out to me, but for you, where's the first place you go when you think about this game? Just reacting real time to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just start by saying, after live tweeting the game on the Dodger Blue account tonight, I bet we're going to be getting a lot of 10 responses as far as panic goes. Everyone was going crazy, which isn't surprising. You know, Dodger fans are passionate. They want to see this team win. We're hungry for a World Series, so it's not surprising. This was just a weird game. You know, it was a pitcher's duel throughout. Lamet and Kershaw both looked great. And then the wheels just kind of came off in that 7th inning there. We'll get into Dave Roberts' decision to pull Kershaw. But the Padres weren't hitting a ton of balls hard that inning. It was a pop up here, a little slow grounder there, a blooper there. I mean, it's unfortunate that it happened like that, but I mean, once the Padres took momentum, I knew it was over from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just give you a sense. We've got Sean who says 8, Ryan says Roberts sucks, Gatsby Girl 32 says worried, the Dodgers got their ass kicked, there's no fire, Kenley should be released, poor defense, poor hitting.
Kenley absolutely catch a body tonight, he didn't even pitch.
We've got poop emojis with Belly, Muncy, Rios, Lux, and Peterson in the middle. Team doesn't look like they want to win. Lamet's better than Kershaw. Exhausting to watch. I mean, I think we got some Padre fans in here, to be fair. But I mean, I'm an optimistic guy at heart. I'll say that. But I think let me start on a positive note. We're going to get to all sorts of potential areas. Let's start with the positive. Clayton Kershaw was freaking fantastic tonight. And today I just posted my 3 up, 3 down this morning on the last week of baseball. And I think, for a team that at one point boasted like our 8th starting pitcher is better than yours 3rd starting pitcher, it's kind of like Walker Buehler's on the injured list. Dustin May looks like he's going to make his next start, but he was day-to-day, came out of his start early. Gonsolin had probably his worst outing out of the bullpen recently. So to see Clayton Kershaw do what he did, I think for me is like, let's just start there and talk positively. This is a guy 6 1/3, 5 hits, no walks, 9 strikeouts. Now, he ends up with 3 earned runs, and we're going to get to that in a little bit, and we'll get to should they have pulled him out and all of that. But 99 pitches, Kershaw looked fantastic. His slider was nasty. It felt like every time he needed to get outs, he could. In the 6th, he gives up an infield single, and just some bad luck, basically, gets him out of the game and the bullpen goes. But before we get into all of the mess, Kershaw, to me, was fantastic tonight. And I think that's one thing as a Dodger fan you should take heart in. Because if this Kershaw is the Kershaw that we're going to get for the next couple of months, then there's a lot less problems that we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. It looked like a kind of a classic Kershaw postseason start where he looks great. Yeah. Runs into some trouble in the 7th inning, and then the bullpen comes in and can't hang on to it for him. You've seen that so many times. But, yeah, no, you're 100% right. He looked great. His velocity ticked up. He had his slider was just money tonight, that low and in slider. I think he had 9 total punch-outs. So, other than the Grisham homer, he didn't really give up too many hard-hit balls. So it was a great outing from him. He's been pretty great all year. And as I've talked about a lot, I think him going into the postseason this year is arguably the best he's going to look in a while because A, he's healthy, which is always the most important thing with him, and B, he doesn't have a lot of mileage on that arm this year. You know, it's a shortened season, so it's not like he's going to be going into the postseason with 180 innings, 100 or 200 innings under his belt. His workload has been very manageable this year. He hasn't really thrown over 100 pitches at all, I don't think. So yeah, I think if there's one positive to take away from tonight's game, it's definitely Clayton Kershaw. He looked great.
Yeah. Well, let's get to just sort of how this game played out. The Dodgers actually get on the run first in the third inning. And we're going to talk about some luck that the Padres got, but I think we do have to be a little fair and acknowledge that the Dodgers didn't exactly hit the ball hard. They start the top of the third. Gavin Lux lines out. That was probably the best hit ball of the whole maybe the whole game for the Dodgers. I mean, he roped one, just didn't get under it enough. Barnes walks. Mookie, a bloop double. We're talking about 71 miles an hour off the bat. Mookie doubles. Seager grounds out for an RBI. Jock Peterson comes up in a big spot, strikes out. We'll get to that a little bit later. Kershaw is dealing. He gave up a double in the fifth, but then he gets 3 straight outs. Grisham hits the home run. We'll get to that. We'll get to the pimp job that Grisham had. That wasn't just at the plate. It was rounding the bases. It was stepping on home plate. But that ties the game. Meanwhile, Lamet for the Padres is dealing. He retires 12 straight in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. And even the hits that he had given up, it was like Muncy had a leadoff single that was like barely hit up the middle. Mookie's bloop double. So he was dealing. Then we get to the 7th. A pop infield single to start. We get a pop-up to right field. We get an opposite field single. And then Roberts just comes out to get Kershaw. You could tell Kershaw wanted to stay in. He's at 99 pitches. Again, neither of these balls that were hit hard, and yet they pull him for Pedro Baez. Now, before people hop down Pedro Baez's throat, let's be fair to Baez. Baez gives up a double. That double was hit 72 miles an hour off the bat. So, I mean, that was not hard contact. Then you get Muncy, the disaster of a play at first base, doesn't know to touch first or throw home, touch first or throw home. He throws home late, gets no outs. Next ball's hit to him. He tries to turn a double play. For me, I don't know who ended up getting the error, but that one's on Taylor. Taylor doesn't catch the ball at second base. It goes into left field. Bios is pulled, so he should have gotten 2 outs. He gets no outs. Kershaw gets all the runs. Then Trinan comes in, infield single that chops over the pitcher, ground ball singer, ground out pick. I mean, it was just a disaster of a 7th inning. And at that point, the wheels are falling off and the game is over. So that's kind of how things break down. But, I mean, where do you want to go first? There's so much. We could talk about Grisham. We could talk about the Kershaw decision. I'll let you kind of drive the ship here. Which of those to you is the biggest storyline?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with that 7th inning because that was kind of the deciding factor in the game. We could get to Grisham in a little bit, but that just tied the game. That wasn't, when the the game was decided by the Padres scoring 6 runs in that 7th inning or whatever. But we've been critical of Dave Roberts a lot on this show.
Yeah.
At one point, I even said if the Dodgers don't win the World Series this year, if I had to, project whose fault it'll be, quote unquote fault, I said Dave Roberts. We've seen him make some poor decisions in the past, but I'm not going to put this one on him. You tweeted, and I agreed with your tweets about how they probably should have left Kershaw and he wasn't getting a lot of hard contact. But it wasn't like Pedro came in and got rocked either.
Yeah.
He came in, he got the little pop-up to short left that fell in for a double. Jock didn't really seem to be in too much of a rush to get over to that. And then he got the ground ball to Muncy where Muncy was looking at the bag, looking at the runner, ended up getting nothing.
Yeah.
And then he got another ground ball to Muncy that was thrown away. So if the ball is a couple inches here, a couple inches there, Pedro gets out of that without any damage and it's still a 1-1 game. And then maybe the Dodgers come and score and they end up winning the game. So I'm not going to put this one on Dave Roberts. It was only Baez's second outing, so maybe I would have went with someone else in that spot. But with that being said, I think he pitched pretty well. And also, I think it's important to remember that he wasn't managing this like a postseason game, right? If this is a 1-1 game with 2 on and 1 out in the 7th inning of a postseason game, I highly doubt Pedro Baez is the first guy out of the pen when he's only pitched once in the last month. So when taking that into account, I don't think it's a huge thing to get upset over. It's just unfortunate luck that it didn't go the Dodgers' way this time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was the big conversation I saw on social media was, sort of what were the Dodgers' motives here. You had some people saying, who cares? It's a meaningless game, blah, 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 blah. Well, it's like, well, obviously these guys are playing. So obviously this game matters, and you want to beat the Padres. Now, as I sort of tried to explain on Twitter, like there's different degrees of wanting to win, right? Everybody wants to win. Now, are you playing like this is game 7 and every arm is available regardless of anything? Or are you playing like we've already clinched our playoff spot, so let's just make sure, right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, do you want to beat the Padres? Of course. Like, could Kershaw have thrown 115 pitches tonight? Of course he could have. But that doesn't do you any good 3 weeks from now if Kershaw has slightly more tax on his arm. And so the Dodgers, but all that said, they brought in Baez. Baez was the team's best reliever a year ago. Now, is he rusty? Is this his second appearance? Yes. Has he been rough this year? Yes. But to the point of, would I have done it? No. I thought Kershaw was fine. Do I understand why they did it? Of course. Do I think like the whole thing got ruined because of this decision? No. Like Baez came in and got what he should have gotten. He gave up a 75-mile-an-hour fly ball and then 2 ground outs, and they got no outs out of those 3 things. So that's not on Baez. It's rough luck for Kershaw to get the earned runs. But ultimately, sometimes these type of games happens. The games where it's like the Dodgers gave up, I think I was looking at the exit velocities. They gave up 3 doubles that were like 82 miles an hour or less. Now, they had one of their own as well, so we've got to be fair there. But then on top of that, you've got infield single here, infield single there, ground ball, seeing eye single here, 2 errors by Muncy and Taylor. I mean, it was just a disaster all in all. But to me, as a guy who's highly critical of Roberts, I understand that one. Now, if the Dodgers absolutely needed to win this, I would have hoped that he would have played that situation differently. And I don't think anybody could say with confidence that he would have. Like, I think we've seen enough to say that we're not convinced he would have done this right. But I think in this situation on this day, it was clear that this game meant far more to the Padres than it did to the Dodgers. And we could argue about should it. I think the Dodgers have higher aspirations. The Padres, Joe Davis even said, they're kind of happy to be here, happy to be in the playoffs. This is a big game for them. It's in San Diego. But at the end of the day, I'm ultimately okay with the decision to go to Baez there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the comparison I made on Twitter earlier was that, for all my Laker fans out there, is that the Dodgers are kind of treating these the way the Lakers treated the 8 seeding games in the bubble before the start of the postseason. Yeah. They already have a postseason spot locked up right now. No, the division's not locked up, but at the same time, there's really no advantages to winning the division this year. The only difference is, you're the 4 seed instead of the 1 seed, and when you look at the standings right now, the Marlins are the 5 seed and the Cardinals are the 8 seed. So, who would you rather play? So they're kind of playing this just to peak in October. They're not trying to peak right now. They're trying to keep everyone healthy, trying to get everyone prepared and be ready for October. And that's not saying that the players on the field don't care about winning, because obviously they do. Obviously when a ground ball is hit to Muncy, he wants to make the play. He's not making an error for a run to score on purpose. Yeah. So obviously they want to win the game on the field, but the way management is treating it is like these games aren't really super important, and they're not, if we're being honest. So while it's frustrating, it is important to remember that the season doesn't end now. And even if the Dodgers would have won this game 20-1, that doesn't mean they're going to win a World Series. We've seen the Dodgers have won 7 straight divisions, and there's been some years where they've looked awesome in September going into the playoffs, won however many straight. And there's been other years where they didn't look so great going into the playoffs. And I feel like their play in October wasn't really indicative of how they looked in September. Yeah. So I don't think there's a whole lot to take away from these games, but obviously we want them to play good, especially against a confident Padres team who thinks they're as good, if not better, than the Dodgers.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, it brings up a question that I want to ask, and Grayson on YouTube is kind of asking a similar question. It's sort of 2 parts, and I'll ask it to you first. Does winning the National League West matter? I mean, obviously, the short answer is yes, of course it matters, but I think people that would argue that they weren't happy about how this game was handled would say, yes, I get it, we're playing for the World Series, but this wasn't a game against the Cardinals or the Marlins. This was a game against the Padres, the team that is just 2.5 games back. So I think that's part 1. And part 2 is, does it matter to you at all whether the Dodgers – does a playoff seeding matter to you at all? I think the argument, aside from the prestige of winning the National League West and keeping the streak alive, etc., there's also the element of, do you care if you're the 1 seed that gets to play the 8 seed versus the second place team in the NL West, as Joe Davis said, is automatically going to be the 4 seed, playing the 5 seed, and then get to play the one after. So, I mean, do those things matter? And if you're in the comments on Facebook or Periscope or on YouTube, I'd love to hear. How much do you care about winning the National League West this year? How much do you care about whether you're the 1 seed or the 4 seed? What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, well, in a normal year, obviously, winning the division matters. You want to avoid that wild card game at all costs in a normal year. But this year's different with the expanded postseason. Regardless of they come in first or second place, they're playing a 3-game series no matter what.
Yeah.
And regardless of they're the 1 seed or the 4 seed, they'll get to play that at home. So they're going to be at home. And we don't really know how the standings are going to shake out. Like literally 5 through like 11 in the NL are all within like 3 games of each other. So we don't know if the 5th seed's going to be the best team of that bunch, or maybe the 8th seed's going to be the best team of that bunch. We really don't know. So I don't think it's like, oh, let's lock up the 1 seed so we play the March round, because we have no clue who that's going to be, and it's probably going to come down to the last day. Yeah. I do think it's good to win the division just for a pride standpoint, just to kind of have that upper edge on the Padres going into the postseason. They're a confident bunch right now, and they're playing really well. They've won 8 straight now, so they have every right to be confident. So if they're able to overtake the Dodgers and win the division, then that's a group you don't really want to see in the postseason. They're kind of playing on house money. You know, they weren't supposed to necessarily compete for a World Series this year. Obviously, they made the big moves at the deadline, which kind of switched up their expectations a little bit. But at the same time, you don't want to give a young, cocky team even more confidence. So ideally, in the perfect scenario, yes, the Dodgers should win the division and go in as the 1 seed. But when we're talking like actual logistics, there's no real advantages to winning the division. The only advantage would be if the Dodgers and the Padres both advance to the NLDS, then San Diego would be the home team in 3 of the 5 games. So that's the only real advantage, if that even means anything. It wouldn't be in, or actually the NL postseason is going to in the bubble in Southern California. So I don't know if that series would be at Petco or at Dodger Stadium. We'll have to just wait and see, I guess, or maybe even Angel Stadium, just if they want to make it so neither of the teams have a true home field advantage. So I guess my answer was kind of yes and no at the same time, but at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if they don't win the division. We've seen them win the division 7 straight years, and the result was 0 World Series championships. So maybe this year, if they don't win the division, this will be the year they win it all. Who knows?
Yeah, and I mean, I think what you're saying is, of course, Dodger fans want to win the division. Like, nobody is like, hey, let's actively try not to. But the flip side is, and I think it's important to point out, winning the division this year matters significantly less than any other year in Major League history, because not only does home field advantage not really matter at all. I mean, like, there's going to be a bubble at some point. But on top of that, everybody has to play a 3-game series. So usually second place in the division is an automatic 1-game, hope you make the playoff kind of scenario. Now it's a 3-game series. And to be fair, the gap between the 5th place team and the 8th place team in the National League is going to be marginal. Both of those teams are going to be less than good. And I mean, just to that point, I'll point this out. For the Dodgers, they're 16-8 at home and they're 17-7 on the road. So the gap between those two. Now the Padres have a much better home record than they do. They're about 500 on the road. So to each team, it's going to be different. But I do think there's something about, I mean, you know, as somebody who grew up with the Dodgers not winning anything for the longest amount of time, I do think Dodger fans, we've probably taken for granted the opportunity to win the division. Now, to be fair, winning the division at this point, nobody's going to be content. It's not like the Dodgers could say, hey, we did it, we won the division, and then we lost in the first round, so like you all should be happy. The stakes have been raised, but I think we've all been around long enough to know that winning the division still matters. And again, you're not saying it doesn't, and I think your point's valid that this year, the advantage of winning the division, other than being able to put on a shirt that says divisional champs, is not much. And so if the Dodgers had to choose between what they felt was the best possible decision-making to set themselves up to make a deep playoff run or going for the division title, I think what I hear you say is you're all for go for the World Series. If that means resting pitchers, if that means saving bullpen arms, if that means giving Jock Peterson 3-hole at-bats and Max Muncy 4-hole at-bats and Gavin Lux and Edwin Rios, giving these guys at-bats so that a couple of them can get going, then you're fine with it. Is that a fair way to say what you're trying to get at?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think players' health should be put at risk to win the division in this specific season, just because of the postseason format and such, right? Like, if the Dodgers were fighting for a postseason spot or one game out or one game up or whatever, we probably would have saw Justin Turner activated off the IL and in the lineup, right? Yeah. But no, they're going to give him as much time as he needs to get ready because the games matter once the postseason starts. As much as we want to beat the Padres this series for psychological purposes and to, build our division lead in the standings, having all of our guys healthy and in the right spot in October is when it's most important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that kind of leads into what I think from before the game even started, to me, was the biggest question that I had. And it was funny because the Dodger lineup came out today and you had the top two, as expected, Mookie and Corey Seager. And then you have Jock Peterson 3 and Max Muncy 4. Now, I had just written my 3 up, 3 down and looked at Max Muncy and how bad he has been of late, which is, to be short, very, very bad. He's 2 for 25 against the Padres. And I think he was like 2 for 15 with 7 strikeouts or something like that in his last 3 or 4 games. So it was brutal. And then my brother texted me, he goes, "Did you not even notice that Jock Peterson was hitting third?" And I was like, no, I was so in mind of like, I couldn't believe Muncy was 4, that Jock was 3. Now they pointed out in the broadcast, the first time ever that Jock Peterson hit in the 3-hole. Both of these guys have been brutal this year. Peterson at least had been gone, had come back, but Muncy especially, both of them had been bad. And it kind of played out exactly as you would have thought it would play out. I remember early in the year when Austin Barnes was abysmal, it felt like the big moments always found Austin Barnes. It was like you could put him at the 8-hole or the 9-hole. It didn't matter. He would come up with the bases loaded. And at that point, you just throw up your hands and say, look, there's nothing we could do about it. Like, we put him at the 9th hole. Now with Jock, he was in the 3-hole. And guess what? Big moments kept finding Jock, which is what happens when you're batting right after Corey Seager and 2 spots after Mookie Betts. So sure enough, in the first inning, Corey singles. Then we have a Jock strikeout, a Muncy strikeout. Third inning, we come back. We've got Mookie, who has the double. Corey Seager gets the RBI single. So Mookie's at third base. Jock Peterson up with 2 outs. What does he do? He strikes out. This isn't a matter of big moments finding him. It's what happens when you're hitting third. And it just continued. I think they ended up 1 for 6 with 4 strikeouts. I believe Max Muncy had a walk in the 9th inning, so that helped things a little bit. And again, Muncy's single was like 70-mile-an-hour exit velocity right up the middle. So it's not a whole lot to brag about. But, I mean, the only thing I can think of is you're trying to get these guys going. Jock's a fastball hitter, so maybe you're thinking Lamette's just going to throw fastballs and he could try and get going. But, I mean, from the get-go, that felt like, to me, a white flag of this is an experimental game, which was just bizarre to me. It just didn't make sense.
Yeah, it was definitely a weird lineup. Roberts gave a reason for hitting Jock third before the game, and he said that once the third time through the order comes around, he wanted more lefties at the top so that the Padres kind of had to make a decision whether to leave Lamette in or go to the bullpen. And if they brought in a lefty, then he would have went to Pollock off the bench, which I guess makes a little sense in theory. But when Lamette's pitching as well as he did tonight, it really doesn't matter. It was a weird lineup. If this was the postseason, that's not what the lineup would look like. I get it. I guess you want to get those guys that are struggling going, and maybe just the fact that of Jock going and looking at the lineup and seeing himself in the 3-hole, maybe that instills some confidence in him. Obviously, it didn't work yet around night, but at this point when guys are struggling, you have the luxury of being able to try things like that since they already have a postseason berth clinch. I personally, if I was the manager, that's not how I would have ordered the lineup. But also, when you look below, it's not like those guys are crushing the ball either. Cody's been struggling. Lux has been struggling. So maybe the one guy you could have put up there is Chris Taylor. He's been swinging the bat pretty well.
Yeah.
But it's also a righty-righty matchup, and Taylor's a big strikeout guy. So I mean, with Will Smith and Pollock, who are two of the team's hotter hitters, not in the lineup, when you're ordering that out of like, it's not like you had great options in the
Yeah.
3 and 4 spot if you're going to leave Mookie and Seager 1 and 2.
Well, and you kind of brought it up. I mean, to me, there is no excuse for a day to go by in which Will Smith is not in the lineup. It just does not. Now, I understand, somebody pointed out that the last time they let Will Smith catch Kershaw, it didn't go well, so Kershaw's back to Austin Barnes. Fine. Okay, Austin Barnes has been hitting the ball all right. Kershaw likes him. He's good defensively. I can live with it. But there's not an excuse for, Will Smith, aside from Mookie Betts and Corey Seager, in some order, those are your 3 best hitters. And
Right.
Will Smith's playing like 50% of the time. It's absolutely insane now. And it's not like it's a platoon thing. It's not like he's only hitting against righties or lefties. He's just hitting when certain guys are on the mound for the Dodgers. It makes no sense to me why he's not in the lineup every day.
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. He should be catching 5 out of every 6 games and that one day off.
Hit him DH. He's a young guy. It's not like he can't play every day.
Get swings. He doesn't have a whole lot of at-bats this year, so the more at-bats, the better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then back to that point about how Kershaw didn't throw well to him. In my opinion, that's even more reason for him to catch Kershaw, so they could build some chemistry together. If they're planning on going into the postseason with Austin Barnes catching Clayton Kershaw. That means that Barnes is potentially starting 2 of the 5 games in an NLDS type series, which the way Will Smith is swinging the bat, there's absolutely no reason for that to be the case as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get to the other big moment in the game that I think had people up in arms, and that was Trent Grisham hitting a home run. Now, I have to admit, Trent Grisham's on my fantasy team. He's done well for me this year, so I'm gonna be nice to Trent for the most part. But he hits a home run, and everybody's joking on Twitter because I couldn't tell, and I don't think anybody could tell, whether he thought he hit a home run or whether he thought he hit it foul. Now, you watch the replay, and he either knew it the whole time or he did an unbelievable transition that fooled everybody. But he hits the home run, and he immediately turns to the Padres dugout and just stares into the dugout, standing at home plate for what feels like 2 or 3 seconds. And then he starts rounding the bases. It looks like he turns immediately and barks something to Kershaw, which, knowing Kershaw, I can't imagine Kershaw said much of anything to him, but he apparently comes and says something to Kershaw. He's got hand signals going around the bases. He gets around third. He's pointing and shouting into the Dodger dugout. Someone from the Dodger dugout is shouting back at him. He does the 2-foot stomp on home plate, yada, yada, yada. Now, it was aggressive. It was over the top. But my personal stance, and I'll just lead with this. Look, I am like the Yasiel Puig guy. I love Puig. I love bat flips. I'm here for all of it. And part of me feels like as a Dodger fan, if I want to celebrate Puig bat flips, I've got to be able to live with it when it happens against my team. Now, did Grisham, was it aggressive? Of course it was. But that's like, I don't want to sound like Madison Bumgarner and the San Francisco Giants over here drawing lines about what's acceptable and what's not. I will say, I think Grisham is lucky that Clayton Kershaw was on the mound, because with Fernando Tatis due up next, if you had the wrong guy, like say Walker Buehler on the mound, Tatis might have gotten a 98-mile-an-hour fastball in his back. And I'll also point out that Trent Grisham was 1 batter away from coming up in the bottom of the 8th inning tonight. And had Grisham actually come up in that one in a game that was 7-1 at the time, I think it might have been dicey. So that's my take. What's your take on the Grisham situation?
No, yeah, I feel the same way you do. I'm a big let the kids play advocate. So I love bat flips and all that stuff. I was kind of just a little taken back by it because it was like, whoa, like that was like, that just felt like a celebration, like of I just hit a walk-off home run or I just hit a big grand slam. Like he just hit a solo home run to tie the game at 1, like in a 1-0 game. Like Kershaw had been dealing up until that point. So I was just kind of like, whoa, like that was a bit much. But I'm all for, letting the kids play. We'll see who gets the last laugh, because if they want to celebrate all their September home runs and winning these games, they could go ahead. We'll see what happens in the playoffs. If anything, he just kind of added extra motivation for Kershaw and the Dodgers moving forward. So if they want to keep doing that, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, and to be fair, a buddy of mine who's a Padre fan just texted me and said, Roberts with the Bumgarner take. Here's Matt Moreno tweeting, Dave Roberts on Trent Grisham's home run, quote, "I don't mind guys admiring a home run. Certainly it's a big game, big hit. Really like the player, but I just felt to stay at home plate, certainly against a guy like Clayton. I just took exception to that," Kershaw's response, quote, "I'm not going to worry about their team. Let him do what he wants." So shout out to Kershaw. I felt like that's the right move. And I mean, Roberts has got to say what he's got to say because he probably doesn't know. If Kershaw's pissed and Roberts comes out and says, "Who cares?" That's maybe a bad look for the manager. Although Roberts also feels like, he's probably a little bit more old school. I mean, Chris Woodward, who had the whole thing with the Rangers, was a coach under Roberts. So hopefully those two aren't aligned in some of that stuff. But I do like Kershaw's response there. I mean, again, I thought it was aggressive, but we've been on the plus side of a lot of aggressive bat flips and home run pimp jobs, whether it's Jock Peterson or Max Muncy or Yasiel Puig or whoever. And so you're not going to catch me getting mad about it. Now, look, if you do that, and the next guy gets hit, then I'm good with that too. So don't go pissed, right? Like, it's like if you come up later in the game and you get hit, so be it. That's how this whole thing works. I'm fine with you bat flipping, and I'm fine with you getting hit. Now, if you want to bark at the dugout and they bark back and you get plunked or Tatis gets plunked, then so be it. That's how the thing's going to play out. Now, it was a close game. It was a 2-1. So Tatis isn't going to get hit with nobody out in a 2-1 game, right? So, it was an interesting sort of thing, but at the end of the day, to me, I don't see this carrying over. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I think if tomorrow's game gets out of hand and Grisham's back in there, I could see somebody on the Dodgers taking exception to it. Some of the bullpen guys are a little less, what's the word I want to use? A little less conservative than Clayton Kershaw. We'll go with that route. And so who knows? But I mean, do you expect this to carry over at all into either of the next two games?
I honestly don't, just because of what we saw earlier in the season where Joe Kelly had one slip away and got suspended 8 games for it. We only got 2 weeks left here, and you don't want to risk, maybe a suspension goes into the postseason. Who knows what Rob Manfred's doing over there? We know he has no clue what he's doing when giving out these suspensions. So I don't think they're going to do anything, just because I don't think you want to take that risk. And then maybe if you throw out one of their guys, I don't want them throwing at Mookie Betts' head, and then next thing you know, maybe he's injured or something, So I don't think we're going to see any of that. I also didn't have a problem with what Roberts said. It's his job to defend his guys. He didn't even, say it was super egregious or anything. He said he enjoys letting the kids play, but he's right. It was Clayton Kershaw on the mound. That's a guy that I feel like young players should have some sort of respect for, just for everything he's accomplished. It wasn't like he got some rookie and the rookie was mouthing off at him or something. That's an all-time great on the mound, and cool, you got him once, but Kershaw will probably, get you out 9 of the next 10 times. So that's something to consider as well. But I don't think it's going to be a huge thing to consider moving forward. Maybe sometimes I feel like sometimes with that stuff, you see it pop back up like the next season. Like we'll see in a game in May next year, someone will remember it, maybe even Kershaw, who knows, and Grisham will get one thrown at him. Like you said, I don't have a problem with that either. If you're going to do that, you have to kind of expect it coming, especially if you're going to mouth off while running around the bases. But for me personally, I don't have a problem with Grisham doing that stuff. Just we'll see you in October, bud.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, again, a tough one for the Dodgers tonight. I think there's one last thing that's worth talking about, and it's been sort of a point of contention, I think, for the last couple of weeks. The Dodger bullpen. I mean, tonight, Kershaw leaves. It's a 1-1 game. Obviously, we've sort of talked about Baez. He doesn't get any outs. He faces 3 batters. One's a bloop double. 2 are reach on errors. Then you have Trinan come in. He gives up 2 hits. One's a seeing eye single. The other's an infield single. You have Spores, who's probably the very last guy on the roster at this point. He comes in, gives up a home run, and that's it in the 9th. I mean, where are you at? Not just tonight necessarily, but big picture. I mean, where are you at with the bullpen? Is there a level of concern with you? And we can talk about Kenley Jansen as well as a part of that, but how concerned are you with the Dodger bullpen?
Yeah. I'm not overly concerned. I wasn't expecting them to maintain a 1.5 ERA the whole season as a group. We knew they were going to give up runs at some point. Kenley, I am a little bit concerned just because we've seen it so many times with him in the postseason. I don't think it should be a strict Kenley's our closer. He gets the 9th inning no matter what. Me personally, I would rather have them kind of mix and match and go based off matchups. Maybe if the bottom of the order is coming up in the 8th inning, then you bring in Kenley for that, and then like Trinan or Gratterall for the top of the order in the 9th. I would rather see that. I'm not holding out hope that it's going to happen just because we've seen what happens in the postseason so many times. But I mean, we just saw a 9 inning bullpen game against the Astros yesterday, where the bullpen gave up 5 hits and 1 run
Yeah.
in 9 innings. So it wasn't their best night tonight. It was, even though there wasn't a whole lot of hard contact. The Myers homer was off Josh Sborz, who's not even going to sniff the postseason roster. So I'm not going to put any weight into that. And at this point, we'll see about Baez. He's got 2 weeks to kind of round into form, or else he could be in danger of missing the roster too, just because they have so many other guys. But I'm not overly concerned. But at the same time, I'm never. Even if the Dodgers bullpen had a 1.00 ERA on the season, it's not like I'm going to go into October fully confident that in a one-run game that they're going to shut the door down. I mean, it's postseason baseball. You're going to be stressed no matter what.
Yeah, and I mean, people talk about the Dodger bullpen like they're awful. I mean, this is a team that has like one of the 2 or 3 best ERAs in all of baseball when it comes to their bullpen. And even Jansen, I mean, again, this is in the 3 up and 3 down I wrote this morning, but it was fascinating to me because I have long been on the I'm concerned about Jansen bandwagon, and yet what it feels like has always been the numbers have been good and the eye test has been bad. Whereas this year, it's like it's sort of the same thing. I mean, the eye test tells you that he's terrible. I mean, I don't think there's a single Dodger fan out there that feels good. I mean, I look at the comments that we've been getting tonight, and if we had talked about Jansen earlier in the show and asked, hey, what's your confidence level in Kenley Jansen, it would have been low. Now, what's fascinating though is you look at his metrics and you go on Baseball Savant. I mean, this is a guy. Among pitchers, he's in the 100th percentile for exit velocity. That means he is basically the best in the league at not allowing guys to hit the ball hard. Same thing, hard hit percentage. He's in the 100th percentile. Expected batting average, 98th percentile. Expected slugging percentage, 98th percentile. And so I don't know what to do with all of that because, again, I watch the guy and I tweet. I'm like, hey, the Kenley Jansen experience, and it never fails. It's always like if it's a one-run game, there's going to be a guy on second base at some point. It's like it's required. And yet you look at it, it's like guys aren't hitting the ball hard off of him. The expected batting average, expected slugging percentage are low, and so I don't know what to do. I feel really good about the Dodger bullpen. I think Ferguson came back strong the other day in the bullpen game. He had a nice outing. Some guys, Kenley had a clean inning. So just some of that stuff. It's almost like I feel good about the depth, but I'm with you. I need to see it. Now, the funny thing is like you said, hey, it's always stressful in the postseason. Well, ironically, historically, Jansen has been the one guy that you could sort of count on the Dodgers in the World Series. Like he's the guy, or in the postseason. I mean, I know he's had his rough moments, but he's also the guy that goes and gets you 6 outs or 5 outs or 7 outs or whatever you need kind of in the moment. So it will be fascinating. I like Treinen as a nice piece. I mean, Jake McGee has been good. If those are like, I think the Dodgers 2 through 5 are going to be way better. The question is, when they need 3 outs in a one-run game in the playoffs, do they have the guy on their roster right now to get them? I don't think it's Jansen. I think you're saying the same thing, but is it Treinen? I mean, do you feel good if that's Treinen? He's been kind of hit and miss a little bit. Jake McGee, someone pointed out like, hey, if you want a guy who's going to miss bats, Jake McGee's the only other guy that's sort of missing bats at the level. Do you really want Jake McGee to be the guy that the Rockies cut before the season that throws basically the same pitch and is not a cutter, it's just a fastball? I mean, it's an interesting dilemma I think Dave Roberts has, and he's hoping that Kenley Jansen figure this out. If Jansen just figures this out, this whole thing goes to bed and everything gets better. But if Jansen doesn't, and they've got to make a decision in the postseason about Jansen as closer, it feels like they got to make that now.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to see them start, giving safe situations to some of the other arms, but we know they're not going to do that, so I'm not going to hope for that too much. But yeah, like you said, they have a large quantity of solid arms. I don't know if they have the high end guys.
Yeah.
Like they don't really have a Brandon Morrow who we just knew was going to be lights out. But they have 5 or 6 or even 7 quality guys who on any given night could come in and get the job done. Another guy who we haven't even mentioned is Victor Gonzalez, who's been absolutely awesome. So he's played his way into a roster spot. And then we got to see how the rotation shakes out. You could have Tony Gonsolin joining that group as well. Or if Gonsolin gets the rotation spot, then maybe Julio Urias joins that group. So I think they're going to have plenty of options. It's just, are we going to pick the right one? And I don't know if either of us have the confidence in Dave Roberts to to make that decision.
Yeah, Gratterall, another guy. But again, I mean, even
Yeah.
Dustin May, if Gonsolin's the third starter and Dustin May, could he end? I mean, but the thing is like May and Gratterall have the lowest strikeout rate of anybody on the roster. I mean, we've talked about it. It makes no sense. But I think the point is in the closing role, you need somebody who can miss bats. When Jansen is on, people can't touch his cutter. Now, when he's not, you usually find out about 2 batters in and it's too late. So I think the best case scenario is Jansen's your closer, but the hook is short. You know, the leash is short and the hook is quick. So maybe you have a guy like, you know, whoever it might be. Maybe it's Jake McGee, and you save Jake McGee to be your closer 2.0, and it's a 1-run game, and all of a sudden, you know, the first two guys reach on Jansen, and he's toast. And you bring in someone like McGee. I don't know. That'll be fascinating because, yeah, it's like, will Dave Roberts really make that decision in the first or second round of the playoffs? I find that hard to believe. Now, will he do it in the next 2 weeks? I also find that hard to believe. But if you're going to do it, it would have to be in the next 2 weeks. And I can't imagine the analytics guys are pumped about it. Now, maybe they are. Analytically, Jansen's good. We know they value clubhouse chemistry, which Jansen's a leader, so that would be hard. Yeah, I mean, the bullpen will be fascinating. I feel good about the bullpen. But I think to your point, I agree with you in the sense that nobody feels good about their bullpen in the postseason. I feel good about our bullpen now. I think they go 7 or 8 deep, but how good I feel about them in a 1-run game and with knowing I need 3 innings of shutdown ball, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Let's just hope that the offense comes around and they're scoring 8-9 runs every game. So it's a nice 4 or 5-run cushion for the bullpen every game. So we don't have to worry about that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that'll do it for us tonight. 7-2 loss to the Padres tonight. The Dodgers come back tomorrow. They've got 2 more against the Padres, so there's plenty of time to get this one right. The Padres do climb within, I believe, a game and a half of the division lead in the National League West. So that is something I mean, they could easily take over the divisional lead by the end of the series, or the Dodgers could extend all the way to 3.5. I mean, there's lots that could happen between now and then. But it'll be interesting to watch. The Dodgers come back tomorrow. I mean, what do you see? Do you think the Dodgers come back in the next 2 games? What's your prediction? Do the Dodgers win 1? Do they win 0? Do they win 2? What do you have for the Dodgers from here on out?
I mean, what we've seen in their series against the Padres this year, we saw at Petco Park, they lost the opener in kind of a similar fashion to tonight, and then they came back and won the next 2. And then at Dodger Stadium in the 4-game series, they lost the first 2. Everyone was, you know, ready to jump off a ledge. The Padres are better, blah, blah, blah. And then they came back and won the next 2. So if that is the trend, then I think we'll see them come out and play well and get a win tomorrow night. We got Tony Gonsolin on the mound, who's arguably been our best pitcher this season.
Yeah.
Going up against Zach Davies, who's also got great numbers this year. He's having a good season. So that'll be a nice little contrast from seeing Lamet and his 98 to 100 to Davies and his 87-mile-an-hour fastball. So maybe that'll help seeing the ball a little better because it's slower. And hopefully we could get the bats going tomorrow and get a win.
Yeah, and then you've got Dustin May after that. So, I mean, as far as the 3-game set, Kershaw, Gonsolin, May, with Buehler on the IL, those are your 3 best pitchers. And so you've got to feel pretty good about that. But, I mean, I think the headline from both of us is there's no reason to panic. This is one game. The Dodgers have won the division 7 times in a row. The priority for the Dodgers right now is making sure that come round 1 of the playoffs, this team is firing on all cylinders. Kershaw is at peak health. They've got bullpen arms that they trust. They've got bats that they feel like they've had a chance to get going. And so if that means putting yourself a little bit behind the 8 ball in some of these games, putting a guy like Baez in a big spot, leaving Jock and Muncy and Lux and Rios in big spots in hopes that you can get 2 or 3 of those guys going, then they're going to do it. And, you know, obviously the Dodgers have not come out and said, hey, this is our strategy. I don't think they would. Obviously they care and desire to win, but I think it's clear that the priority is not on this game so much as it is the big picture. And as fans, you know, we just got to see how that plays out. If the Dodgers lose the division and then lose in the first or second round of the playoffs, I think that's going to hurt because you're going to go back and say, well, at least we can't even say we won the division 8 years in a row because we were playing for something else. But at this point, the Dodgers have to go all in. There's only one satisfying way that this season ends, and whether they lose and win the division, nobody's going to wake up the next morning and say, you know what, we at least won the National League West, and you know what, we at least won that series against the Padres in the middle of September. So we've got lots of season left. Not lots of season, but there's a couple weeks of the season left. There's plenty of time for things to play out positively or negatively, but we're hoping positively The Dodgers are in the playoffs. We know that much. So the Dodgers can start gearing up to see who they play and to make sure they're all dialed in. So before we go, Daniel, any last thoughts on tonight or the rest of the season before we close this thing out?
Yeah, just to follow up on what you were just saying, this is kind of reminds me of 2017 where, the Dodgers were great. And then they hit that little rough patch in late August, early September where they lost like 15 out of 16 or something like that. And they lost like 6 straight to the Diamondbacks at one point, and everyone was saying the Diamondbacks are better than the Dodgers, going to beat them in the postseason, and then the Dodgers swept them in that LDS. So I'm not hanging my hat too much on these regular season games. I care more about staying healthy and being in a good spot once the postseason starts, not on September 14th.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to give a shout out to Hector Barraza, who's on Facebook, clearly a Padres fan. And I just want to say, I mean, the Padres just won the biggest victory in probably franchise history, I think, based on Hector. So shout out to Hector. September 14th, a regular season game to climb within a game and a half of the National League West. Shout out to you, Hector. Throw a party for yourself tonight. Celebrate. This is big. I mean, we've won 7 National League West titles in a row. So I understand that for us, it's easy to say, who cares? But for you, I mean, being the cellar dweller of the National League West for the last decade and a half, it's good to have you. Appreciate you joining us and party it up tonight, man. Enjoy your night. So we appreciate you all joining. Check out the Dodger Blue 1958 YouTube channel. We've got post-game stuff. I'm sure Dave Roberts comments, stuff like that. Facebook, DodgerBlue.com. We'll have a post-game review. And yeah, stay tuned. We got more content coming this week from DodgerHeads. That's Daniel. I'm Jeff. We appreciate you all being here. Have a good rest of your night. Let's hope the Dodgers get one tomorrow.